Hey guys, welcome back. This is JJ. Welcome to another update video of my Tamiya Ducati 1199 Panigale S project build. So after my last video, I have now completed step 5 and step 6 on the instruction manual. So let me show you what I have done. So part 5 is mainly the installation of the swing arm, so which is this solid piece of black plastic with the chain, the gear, as well as the brake rotor and brake caliper. So that's step 5, and also there is a couple of chain guards as well. So I'll just walk you through very quickly. So the installation of the swing arm is not that difficult. Just need to make sure that you don't forget to put in the larger poly caps. And then the change is pretty easy to slot in. There is an opening here, so you can just guide one end in and then hook the other end inside, and then this opening part would be covered by the front facing arm. The only tricky part for step 5, it is mainly that part B7, which is the lower chain guard, which is this part here, the small arrow thing. So you have to put a bit of glue there, and then you probably need to use a tweezer or a prier to help you attach that at the correct position. The steps showed, you put the two-side swing arm together, and then you put the chain on, and then kind of the next steps is you install the brake disc rotor and caliper, and then you go to install the chain guard and the arm cover or upper cover, and then you install the rest. So for me, I will think it's easier to install B7 at the first stage, because you could easily hook the chain around the chain guard, because this is the loose part anyway, and you only need to put one bit of glue at the back side of this gear in order to stick into that slot. Rather than following this instruction, you already have the chain and the gear stuck to the arm, and then you try to fit this tiny little piece of chain guard underneath. It can be quite tricky. As you can see, that part is quite small as well, so it's hard to put that in the correct position because the chain is kind of in the way. So it's just somewhere to be aware of. And then when you install the brake disc, it is fairly straightforward. You just need to remember not to put any glue or cement, so that the brake disc could rotate freely like this. And because there's nothing securing the disc at this stage, so I can easily just remove this, and you can see the brake disc pretty much slot in between the brake calipers here. So I just need to feed the brake disc into the gap, and then just rest it like that. And on the instruction, they only mentioned not to put glue or cement on the brake disc, because otherwise the disc as well as the wheel won't be able to rotate. But they didn't mention anything about adding a bit of lubricator or oil. But I presume you probably won't be pushing the bike around, so you probably won't need lubricating oil. But I've done my bit. I put a little bit of grease there just so the disc could rotate smoothly, and basically just less friction in between the plastic. So it's up to you if you want to do that. You don't have to. Okay, and then obviously the end of step 5, it's basically attach the swing arm to the back of the engine block, and then you installed the front gear cover, which is that tiny little part in black. Everything is fairly easy to fit in. It's like a hinge mechanism. You can see there is a screw there, and there is also a screw on the opposite side. So this basically moved, and because you can't see where the screw is going like that, as I mentioned in my last video, when I mentioned about tightening the screw, you just need to turn this until you see the screw is sitting flush to the bottom side of the plastic, and then you stop. Don't over tighten it. And whereas for this one, because it's kind of like indent or offset, so you can't see exactly where the screws are going. So what you need to do is just keep feeding in the screw gently until you can feel there's a bit of resistance, and then you stop, and then you do the other side up, same way, turn it slowly, and then when you feel the resistance, you stop. And then in order to determine whether the two sides of the screws are fitted in properly, you just need to give this rear swing arm a shake, not up and down, because it's meant to do that, but you hold it left and right and then try and rock it in that direction. Yeah, so if the screws are not tightened properly, you can pretty much shake this left and right like that. So if that's the case, then give this, the right side, another quarter of a turn, and same for the left side, quarter of a turn, and then give it another shake. And then if it's still a little bit loose, give it another quarter of a turn on both sides until you can feel there is no give when you shake it left and right, but it still gives you the movement of the up and down suspension. Then you will know this is fitted correctly. It's quite easy to do. I'm sure you guys will be able to follow that. And then this little part, which is this part here, is C35. So basically you just need to get that piece of plastic. You feed 1.2 by 8 millimeter screw through, and then make sure you don't tighten it too much so that the strut is free to move, because when the suspension is fitted, when the swing arm moved up and down, you need to give movement to this as well. So make sure you don't over tighten the screw holding this piece of strut. And the rest of the step 5 is fairly straightforward. They even show the side profile of exactly how this piece of gear guard should be positioned, which is that. It's very easy to follow. And then moving on to step 6, which is basically building your suspension system. And you can see here it said applied metal primer before painting. So basically, if you are getting the detailed up part, you will have that suspension reservoir or suspension cap thing in a metallic gold color. So in order to stick that end onto the suspension, which essentially on this part, which is this. So you basically have to attach that end to the main suspension part. The plastic is fine. You can just put glue or cement and then it will stick between plastic and plastic. But because the detailed up part, that would be made of metal or aluminium, and then you really need to use a file or sanding paper to sand that cross section area so that there are rough edges in order for you to apply the super glue or other type of cement that could stick between metal and plastic. So remember that. The rest of the assembly of the suspension system, it looks a little bit complicated, but it is not difficult. You just have to use the tweezer because the parts are quite small. So that part there is basically this. It is quite small, and there are two parts here. So where you see the underside with the suspension coil molding, you need to stick that onto the back side of it, and it shows you what it should look like when it's done, so that you know you are aligning the two parts correctly. And basically that's what you get, right? And also when you try to cut out the extra sprue, be very careful because the parts here are getting smaller and thinner. So make sure when you cut the piece out from the plastic molding, you do it gently and make sure you don't accidentally broke off some of the parts here, especially the second part of assembly, which you have even finer parts. It's all very detailed and it looks really amazing. So is there any difficulty in fitting this part? I don't think so. Most of it is just they are harder to handle because the parts are quite small comparing to like the main body. And I mean, if you kind of take things slowly and do it properly, then I'm sure you will get it right the first time as well. And that reminder is basically for the coil, because the suspension coil came in a black color So if you're planning to airbrush it to yellow, you need to apply the metal primer onto the black spring before you apply the bright yellow color as a top layer. But I've been told if you use a normal primer, it will also work as well. So when I build the second kit, I will give it a go, and then I will be able to tell you whether it actually works with the normal plastic primer on the metal parts. Again, looking at the part C15, which is the leg for supporting your bike. Again, it has a very tiny screw here. So when you screw the parts together, make sure you turn the screw very slowly until you see there's no gap between the screw and the plastic, as well as the plastic to the plastic. So stop there when you see that, and then just to give it a test to see if this is moving freely. If you find it a bit loose, give it another quarter of a turn, and then if you think it's too tight, then just unscrew this very gently. Then you will be able to get this right. Just make sure there is a bit of resistance when you move this, not too tight and not too loose at the same time. Okay, so that's pretty much is part 6, basically building these two parts. And then on to step 7, which is to attach the two parts that I have, or one of the parts that I built from step 6 onto the bike. And then you install further parts, and then step 8 will be installing this smaller part onto the opposite side of the bike, and then you'll be running some of the flexi hose. So I will do step 7 and 8 and maybe 9 as well, and I will come back to you guys shortly once I get these steps done. So I have just finished steps 7, 8 and 9. Step 7 is basically you use 3 screws to fasten the parts that I have installed on part 6 together with some extra parts. That's to glued onto the left hand side. And then step 8 is to use that part assembled here on the right hand side of the bike, as well as installing the reservoir and running some flexi hose. And then step 9 is basically the assembly of the front fork. So let me show you here. That's the part that I have screwed on the left hand side, and also that part that was previously assembled. And then I also installed that tiny little parts here, which I'm sure in the next few steps we'll be running flexi hose from here, the V-shaped thing. And then also installed this part here, part of the suspension, as well as the suspension coil cover right here, and on the other side it's basically installed this 2 reservoir, as well as running the flexi host. Right there, there's 2, and then there's also another one here for the rear brake caliper. So that's step 7 and 8. Step 7, there's no difficulty there. That little part, this one, that might be a little bit tricky to handle because it's quite small, and the rest of them are fairly straightforward. This coil cover or shield, on the back side you literally have 3 points of contact, just like the position of the screws, and that's fairly easy to stick on. On this side, however, the 2 reservoir, this part here, which is part B14, step 8, that is a little bit tricky to glue it on, because there's literally, it's only mainly 2 points of contact. Let's see if I can find a better angle. So it's like there and there, and then once you have this part in position, then you can add extra glue around, mainly underneath this screw and that screw there, which form a perfect contact. So 4 points of contact to basically make this part secure to the engine block. And then running the flexi host is fairly straightforward. You just need to cut into the right length. You can use a ruler, or you can even lay the cable or the hose on here. This is the exact measurement. And then you just need to use a tweezer to shimmy the hose in very gently. And same as the other side. So make sure when you're fitting the flexi hose, you fit them in gently and holding all the parts together, because you don't want to end up breaking any plastic bits, because you might need a little bit of force to guide the flexi hose into the slot. So if you do it slowly, I'm sure you will have no issue whatsoever. Just make sure you take your time. And then step 9 is basically you assemble the part of the handlebar as well as the front suspension fork, which is this. There's no difficulty in step 9. It's pretty straightforward. One thing that I've done extra, the brake disc just keep coming off because there's nothing holding it in place as yet. So step 9, after you assemble the front fork, it just asks you to guide the suspension through the slot, and then you put a screw over and then the end cap to kind of hide the big screw. So what I've done is I have put some grease inside this sleeve. So basically when I guide this part in, as well as the top cover in, the shock will be able to move freely without much resistance. and it is a lot smoother as well. And as you can see, this is where the main screw here, get fed in, and then the small cap to cover the screw. So it's that. Fairly straightforward. And sorry, brake just keep coming off. Maybe I should just keep it aside. So let me just rest this here. So that's step 9 complete as well. So I will move on to step 10, 11 and 12. So it's basically the rear wheel assembly, as well as I believe that's the front wheel with the mudguard, and also the bike stand. And then step 12 is basically to put everything in. You run the screw through to secure everything. So it looks pretty straightforward. So I will do those 3 steps off camera. Hopefully it won't take me too long, and I'm quite pleased with the model kit so far. I did take my time to cut out the parts properly. I used the craft knife and the sanding pad to try to smooth out the cut, or the, what do you call it, the sprue, to smooth everything down. And also make sure you take your time to screw in those tiny little screws everywhere. Make sure you don't crack the plastic, and the result will be quite pleasing, to be honest. I'm really enjoying the assembly of this Tamiya bike. It definitely looked good, even though I haven't applied any water transfer or any coloring, and I haven't even done the detailing. So everything is just straight out from the box. I just cut them out, glue them together. So far so good. I really enjoyed this assembly of the Tamiya kit. Haven't managed to break anything as yet, which I am quite pleased about. And just take a look. This is straight out from the box, and it looked quite nice already. So you can imagine, with the airbrushing, using the detailer to detail the engine block, and then putting the water transfer decal and give it a better polish. I'm sure my second Ducati 1199 Panigale S is going to look pretty amazing. So for those of you who don't have the equipment to airbrush or to add the details, minimum you will still be able to achieve this. And obviously you will also apply the water transfer, which I am not doing on this first bike. So no doubt whatever you do is going to look even better than this. So you just need to be patient and cut out the parts slowly, and then trim them and file them to give a better finish. So stuff like that, where there was a cut mark, I have straightened it out and sand it down to give it a smoother finish. To obviously on my second bike I will do the same steps, and then when I applied the primer and then the actual airbrush acrylic paint, then it's going to look perfect. It does look really good. It doesn't show a lot of those cut marks, to be honest. A lot of them are quite hidden, so well done to Tamiya in really, you know, they have thought about how to make the model look pretty as possible, even though with minimal effort. It's really, really cool. And just this mudguard alone, this is how many parts? I think there are 2 parts. So one of them is this whole lot, and then this right hand side one, this is a separate part. So where you see the line here, there you go, you can see the cracks here. So that's actually a separate part, which I glued them together, but it looks really good. And then obviously if you are building the bike, even though you don't want to put any coloring on, you can also drill out those holes on the ventilated disc. But as I said, this first bike I'm trying to keep it to minimum of effort, so I won't even do that, just so when I finish the second one I can put them side by side to give a good comparison. Okay, so now I'm going to continue with step 10, 11 and 12, and I will come back to you guys very shortly.